about the world we live in today, which is, I think, not the world any of us want it to be. I think that's fair to make an assumption about. And the world we live in today also relies a lot on technology. And it also requires that we show up not inside of a box on a screen. And the four of you have very interesting lived experience and professional experience trying to merge both of those worlds. In my work, I see a lot of folks who feel comfortable and safe doing community activism and community building in person, like getting everyone ready and inspired, right? And like physically knocking on doors, talking to other humans. And the idea of having to sit down at a computer feels very overwhelming. And then there are the folks who are like, I'd have to talk to another human out loud in person and they could like see me. That feels completely intimidating. I will only use Twitter, which is not maybe totally effective. So we're here to talk about what it means to move people between those worlds and how we more effectively create that world that we want to see by using both strategies integrated. So to get us started and to get everyone in the room familiar with the context you work in, we can go in any order. We do not need to use like a white dominant line. But whatever you want to do, share both who you are, how you operate, where you're coming from, and what this world of being both online and offline looks like for you.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sohayla Eldeeb. I'm a freshman at Stanford University, but more importantly, I'm a grassroots organizer, originally born and grew up in Egypt, and I did a little bit of climate activism there, but I also spent time in Florida, where I currently serve as the Global Outreach Director of 0 Hour, which is a youth-led movement that has led mass mobilization over social media and like down on the ground too as well in Washington, D.C., where we held our first youth-led march. And right now we're still working on advocating and educating the public and especially the youth about the intersectionality of the climate justice issue as a whole.
Ahlan wa sahlan, Sohayla. My name is Olivia Katbi Smith. I am the co-chair of the Portland chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. We are the largest socialist organization in the United States. We have about 75,000 members, 1,700 here in Portland. So we reject all forms of exploitation and oppression and organize with the ultimate goal of ending capitalism in favor of a society that is run by the people, for the people, not to make profit. So DSA has had explosive growth over the past few years, and a lot of that is thanks to our online community building, but also with that growth and with the growing repression from the state and the Trump regime, a lot of our online presence also leads to a lot of safety and security concerns. So that's something that we definitely have to be aware of when we're doing that community building.
My name is Kat Endgame, and I work with an organization called Popular Mobilization, or PopMob, in Portland. And we came together in response to the various alt-right and conservative groups that were coming and holding protests in Portland that resulted in a great deal of violence against Portland's citizens. And we saw that there were a lot of people showing up in the streets, but not nearly enough to shut down what was happening, and thought that it would be helpful to try and mobilize everyday anti-fascists to show up. One of the ways that we found success doing that is obviously using digital tools, and we try to take a perspective that everything, like, it needs to be fun, it needs to be interesting. The revolution needs good design. And I do most of the branding and creative work. I produce the hype videos, and if you've seen any of that stuff online, that was probably made by me.
Hey, I'm Patrick. I'm from Berlin, actually. I'm a journalist, and I'm spent the last 4 weeks in the US researching for a book I'm writing right now about the alt-right in Germany, especially, and how they are using digital tools. So I was coming to the US to do research and to get some hope and inspiration so far. I got a lot of depressed impressions. So I'm happy to be here.
America's not super inspiring right now in that regard.
I'm afraid.
So I think one area that I wanted to dispel early in this conversation that has at least been something that's come up for me in my work is this myth that I have some sort of like very prestigious degree in digital community engagement or something like that doesn't really exist, right? And that folks see that as a quick excuse that they don't do that work, right? That they're not trying to use digital skills to get people to show up, and they're not getting people offline to show up online and have their voices heard there as well. And I think that's a really easy kind of cop-out, right? So I'd love it if you all could dispel that a bit by talking about how you got to this place. Like, it probably isn't from a prestigious degree and a made-up topic of changing the world through the internet.
I mean, in terms of how I got to socialist organizing, I would say that so I'm an Arab American, and Palestine was always an issue that I cared about, and I saw that the Democrats and the Republicans were horrible on that issue, and I thought that that was just the way it had to be, and that's what we had to accept. And Bernie Sanders came along and started talking about democratic socialism, and I was like, oh, there's this whole other entire ideology out there. This isn't the way it has to be. We can change the entire system. And then I joined DSA because he used the words democratic socialism. And through DSA, I learned so much more about the systemic cause, the crisis of capitalism that we are in right now. And, I do have a degree in communications, but that's not what I spend my time doing in DSA. My husband actually runs our Twitter account. He's right there. But he was telling me, like, he tweets stuff only if it's going to be like a spicy take. It's got to be a hot take, otherwise it won't get traction on Twitter. Like, that's just the way Twitter is. So you have to be, it's sort of like instinctive in that way. Like, you just have to have good instincts on what's going to do well on Twitter. Whereas Facebook is like more for, you share events with friends, and people see events, they see their friends going to the events, and that's what translates to people showing up. So I think it's just sort of trial and error, and actually using these platforms for your personal use, you realize what works and what doesn't.
Kat, what about you? How did you come to make hype videos?
Yeah, so I'm a designer. My job, I design. I'm an environmental designer, and but the core of design thinking is the same regardless of the challenge that you're trying to take on, and that is that you need to make stuff to make more stuff, or in the immortal words of Bob Ross, talent is pursued interest, right? So I started in design not by finishing high school and thinking, I want to be a designer. Actually, I wanted to be a political scientist. And I did that for a little while, and then I said, screw it, I'm traveling. And so I threw my life in a bag and I took off. I did that several more times throughout my adult life, but you don't need to hear all of those stories. I came back and I decided, never mind, I'm going to study women's studies. I'm going to do gender theory. I'm going to be a social worker. And then I realized that was super depressing and that I don't have good enough boundaries to do that in a healthy way. So I realized that I had been making terrible posters and terrible zines for many years, for my friends, for the activist groups that I was working with. And I just kept doing it, and at no point did I think, this is going to be my job. And then eventually, I switched to the architecture program at Portland State, and it became my job. And I don't have a degree in video. I don't have a degree in social media management. I don't have a lot of context for that. But I regularly make hype videos that get like 30, 40,000 shares or views that go all over the place. And partially that's drafting on the fact that, we're tracking what the narrative is, right? So Portland in this particular moment, the alt-right presence here and the violence that's happened, that's a national story that people are interested in. So we're definitely drafting on something that's topical. But it's the actual skill of producing that content. I encourage everybody to download some sort of video making software and just screw around, just make stuff. You will fail. It will be terrible. But the next thing you make will be a tiny bit better, and the next thing you make will be a tiny bit better, and eventually you'll be producing content that is actually useful to what you're trying to get done. And I think the key to getting social media engagement and driving social media engagement that leads to real world engagement is getting to that place where you're producing rich content that's, that's intriguing to people. And it doesn't have to be spectacularly beautiful. Like if you go and look at Pop Mob stuff, it's honestly pretty messy because I made it in one afternoon, but it's effective. We know what the message is, and we try to keep everything to like 1 minute long and have message discipline.
I definitely resonate with Screen because of the fact that 0 Hour is a youth-led movement with activists from all around the country and even around the world. And we primarily communicate over line. So like every single week we have Zoom conference calls, even though we're like on opposite sides of the country, opposite sides of the world, different time zones, yet we built this movement online. So we started back like in 2018 where we wanted to hold the first ever youth-led march on Capitol Hill. And we did it. We like got the job done, but we came to find out that we didn't get the numbers that we wanted. So like if it's like from street to street, our street wasn't so like practical in that case. But then days later, we found out that we kind of blew up on social media in the fact that like our social media engagement was like really successful, where we had like Avengers superheroes like tweet at us, presidents, like former vice presidents, things like that, who were like really engaged in what we were tweeting and what we were putting online. And more importantly, like the mass mobilization of youth that were really resonating with our platform and resonating with our mission. And we found out that like in that moment that it really numbers didn't matter of what happened on the street. More importantly, like our power that we had with our social media accounts and our social media engagement had led to like not just mass mobilization, but mass education and education with the youth.
Awesome. Thanks for bringing up the education piece too. That's great. Patrick, do you want to say anything to this?
Actually, like when I started my professional career as a journalist some years ago, I developed a feminist talk show for public television in Germany on YouTube, and then I got re-traumatized because like I'm from East Germany, and I experienced like neo-Nazi demonstrations and presence in the streets. And like 5 years later, or even 10 years later, when I started this project online, it all came back like with this trolling, and I was surprised how good organized how well organized they are, and how powerful. And so that's why I started to investigate the German troll and alt-right scene. And I really appreciate what you said, because what I'm curious about is why are like liberal, more in the German understanding of liberal, or leftist political actors are so bad with Instagram, and the alt-right is so good. That's actually what I'm curious about.
We need a like intervention for progressives on Instagram, is what you're saying?
I think so.
Okay. Do you want to speak to that? I don't know if you felt it was a direct commentary, but if Pop Mob can address the issues.
So the left is terrible at, not just at Instagram, the left is terrible at aesthetics, right? And we want to treat things with this sense that, well, aesthetics aren't very smart, right? Substance is what's important. But I hear a lot of people like sitting around, we held an event and nobody came to it, right? And the reason that nobody came to it is because the masses just can't understand the power of Karl Marx, or like whatever, right? No, nobody came to your event because your poster sucked. Your Twitter presence is terrible, right? Like nobody's following you, nobody's listening. You have to make it beautiful, you have to make it interesting, you have to make it engaging. And if you can't, like, you have to start there. You can't get to the meat of political work, of building coalitions, of showing up and actually creating change in the streets, or of pushing back against, neo-Nazis in East Germany, or the alt-right, which is a bizarre, giant coalition of groups that include neo-Nazis in Portland. You can't get to there if you can't get people to stop for 5 seconds and look at your poster, or stop for 30 seconds and watch your video. the purpose of that video, the purpose of that poster is to communicate some very simple information. We want you to know what's happening, why it matters, and what you should do about it. So tips for people trying to utilize social media as a platform: focus on making it beautiful and focus on keeping your message discipline, keeping your intent clear and concise.
Yeah, and something you said before, Kat, too, in like having a consistent narrative that you're building on. Olivia, you were speaking a little bit to DSA's approach to social media. Is that something that you all are thinking about, or are you, because of the opportunities that exist in America today, like more focused on lifting up Alexandria, Bernie, whoever that are making comments, you know? How do you manage that narrative bit? And also tips for Instagram, apparently.
Yeah, we actually are not very active on Instagram. I don't know why. The left is very good on Twitter, though, I will say. A lot better than the right. But yeah, I mean, we do use Twitter especially to spread our message. I mean, we see it as Facebook is where we have people translate into numbers in the streets. That's where they, see about the events. But Twitter is where we do our political education, where we talk about this broad sort of socialist messaging, where we talk about national and international politics, and yeah, connect it to things that AOC is saying or Bernie is saying, even though we might criticize some of the things they're saying internally. Right. Outwardly, we want to have a unified message and build on the things that people are already seeing so much in their feeds, people who don't really, pay attention to the infighting of leftist politics. We definitely want to use those opportunities to educate people. I mean, I found out through Twitter about DSA. I met my husband on Twitter. I know so many people from Twitter. I meet people like at the DSA convention, at international conventions. I've met people from Twitter. Twitter is a really good place for people who want to learn more to get educated. And I also think it's tricky because Twitter, the corporation, is really terrible, and so, we can't really rely on Twitter. We can't really rely on Facebook, knowing that they're collecting our data, knowing that they're allowing Nazis to organize and to thrive while they suspend people for speaking out about BDS or speaking out about whatever Jack disagrees with. We can't rely on those platforms, but we should utilize them to our advantage while we can.
Yeah, you all okay speaking to that for a second? I mean, I think that's a big kind of moral, values-based conundrum for people trying to organize, especially for massive change, because what it means is we're relying on tools that, as companies that built them, may not agree with the values we're trying to advocate for, and these are free because we are the product, right? The only reason your Facebook account is free is because they know strange amount of correct and very incorrect things about us, and they just sell it, right? So what does that mean to invest in community spaces there when you're then telling those community members to also give away their data? And how do we operate in that world? And you want to speak to that from 0 Hour's perspective? How you all do that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because like I said before, 0 Hour's platform is very intersectional in where we have common values, as you talked about, against capitalistic values, against corporations, against these different morals that these different corporations hold and devalue their consumers with. So we had this midlife crisis back in January or something, thinking, are we hypocritical by utilizing the same corporations that we're against? So we kind of toyed with that for a long time, because essentially that's how we built our organization, but in essence that's what we're fighting against. But it kind of goes back to that quote where it's dismantling system of oppression with the master's tools. So we're kind of utilizing the master's tools to emphasize and highlight other groups that are usually devalued in society, and in a way trying to fight back with our own values and our own morals.
Other folks want to speak to that?
I just thought about you said we want to educate people on Twitter. I think that's part of the problem is that progressives are always want to educate people but not want to entertain people. And I think it's very the alt-right, especially in Germany, and I think what my impression is also in the US, it's pretty good and entertaining, and that's what it is about. That's how they get people. And I think progressives also in Germany are very, very bad in entertaining.
I want to jump on that. So the root of the word education, the root, and I'm not a linguist, so I can't actually tell you the like proper stuff. The root of that shares the same root as seduce, right? And I think that the role of an educator, and this is not to get creepy, right? But like the role of an educator is to seduce the person they're trying to educate into knowledge, into a desire for knowledge. And that doesn't start from shaming people. It doesn't start from like trying to overload people with a massive amount of information. It starts by giving them a beautiful ideal. The other thing that I think is important with the question of like, how can we justify using these platforms? Are we hypocrites for participating in this culture? Like, should you not just burn your smartphone and drive your car into the river and run off to the woods, right? Is that not the most ethical life? And when I was 17, my answer probably would have been, yeah. If you're not blowing up dams, you're not doing anything. What are you doing, right? But ultimately, I've come to a place of more kind of pragmatism, and I find that like the sort of an analysis of moral purity around trying to create political change makes it like the left is really good at doing that, such that we draw ourselves into a little corner and then can't do anything. And everybody else in the world doesn't care and doesn't do that. And they're all out there winning, right? So I think that we need to be looking at what are our goals, how do we know that we've succeeded, and we use the tools that we have available. And we have this, like in the 90s, we thought that the internet was going to, revolutionize the world, and it did, but not in the ways we wanted it to. But there's still time, right? Like, yes, the planet is burning. Yes, capitalism has been ruining all of our lives and destroying the working class for literally its entire existence. Yes, the alt-right is running rampant, but there's still time. We're not done yet. And we've got these tools, and even though we are the product, those tools are free, and the people are listening.
You're hyping us right now.
I'm trying.
Okay, I know Olivia wants to go.
Oh, I just wanted to say the capitalist will sell us the rope we used to hang him with.
Right. Yeah. Right, and I think another piece of this, just as we're on all of the other paradoxes of this work, something that I find to be a bit of a narrative of this, like maybe not the left is bad at Pinterest or Instagram or whatever, but like kind of more to what others were saying, that we're educating, this is like perfect, morally correct information versus, caricatures of humans that get a bunch of people on the right excited and happy and entertained, right? Is the paradox of tolerance. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this, that if you are tolerant forever, only the intolerant people will live, right? Because if the tolerant are just always tolerant of intolerance, you will die. And instead, to be truly tolerant, there has to be a point in which tolerant folks say we are intolerant of that intolerance. And how do we do that in this narrative that is also inspiring and entertaining and like looks pretty on Instagram stories? How do we do that as folks trying to call folks into action? Please solve the world. Right there. Anyone?
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring up the alt-right doing all these exciting, engaging things and entertaining things, because I don't see that here. It might be different in Germany, but the alt-right are fucking losers here. Like, I mean, when you see them at the Patriot Prayer rallies or whatever, and they have 300 people, they are flying in from all over the country. They're not 300 Portlanders versus the 1,000 Portlanders that we have that are actually living in these communities, and this is our town. So they're trying really hard to look like they have this movement that doesn't actually exist, and I think it's very fringe, and that's what makes it dangerous, because we see these fringe, because they're not disciplined, they are most likely to commit these mass shootings and stuff. In the short term, I mean, they are not disciplined. It would be even more dangerous should they become disciplined in the long run. But I don't see them being cool or entertaining here. I think that I think we do have to worry about that, specifically with like YouTube for the younger generation, but I think we're not there yet. And I think, yeah, we do have to counter that with some sort of like sparkly entertainment, and that's why I said, you know, he only tweets spicy takes, because it's like you have to have something that's going to get people fired up. And Pop Mob does a really good job of that. Like when we had our last anti-fascist rally. You probably heard about all the milkshake controversy. That was two times ago. But it's always a fun party, and that's that gets people to come because they feel safe, because they feel like it's going to be this fun event. And I don't want to speak for your organization, so if you want to talk more about that, you can.
I think that's the core. The core. So the way that I've been going to protests and rallies and stuff since I was like a tiny person, and the way that it's always worked is we've got a super masculine like left, right? We're like a bunch of badasses, and we're gonna go fight the cops, we're gonna fight the right, and wah, you know. And the right has the same culture, right? Like they've got their cosplatriots, right? Like a bunch of dudes in tactical gear showing up because they're ready. They're ready for the boogaloo, right? They're actually just idiots who are lonely and sad on the internet, but they look terrifying. So I think one of the core components of what we were trying to accomplish is fighting back against toxic masculinity through fun, right? So getting people to come out, getting people to participate, trying to help people feel safe by being as queer as humanly possible, by being feminine, by putting women in the front, by elevating the voices of women and people of color, by doing everything that we possibly can to separate doing leftist organizing from being this traditional concept of a revolutionary that is actually like a war hero, which fits into this like very specific existing concept of what someone's supposed to look like and doesn't really have room for someone that looks like me, right? But I am a revolutionary. I'm here, I'm trying, I'm fighting to make this world different, but my tools aren't guns and my tools aren't swords. My tools are Adobe Premiere and Illustrator and my sketchbook. And I'm still dangerous.
And also on that line, when we're talking about like social media platforms, like the alt-right specifically, always have to be tolerant by like, you know, adhering to these aesthetics and like guidelines and things. So like I really resonated with what you said about, you know, substance is more important than like aesthetics at some point. And that's how like 0 Hour operates personally. We kind of defy these stereotypes by having women of color lead, indigenous peoples lead, frontline youth that are facing the climate crisis lead, and we're posting things that aren't really like, you know, making our feed look pretty, but more some like things that genuinely like show us as youth having fun and like doing the work and the organizing, yet we're still, you know, thriving and having a good time. And that's really, I think that's what makes us more unique compared to like other like, you know, big white green organizations like the Big Greens, because like we're genuinely like showing substance and not being tolerant to like the social media guidelines and the aesthetics.
Awesome. I'd love to shift a little bit and talk about what's happening in our communities that we're serving and engaging, and what shifts or patterns or trends you're seeing them either participating in or exposed to or reacting to that you have felt you need to then either shift how you're engaging them or respond to, because they're all talking about it, so now you have to talk about it, or they're all using a new tool and now you have to use that tool, or they don't want to go to the west side, so you have to have meetings on the east side. Like whatever those trends are, I'm curious to hear how it's impacted your organizing. When you all speak at once, it's just so hard to hear. Do you want to start from 0 Hour's perspective of that change? Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, there are some trends that we have followed through with. Like let's say like when there's a Democratic debate, we jump on Twitter, jump on Instagram, put live streams on, put like the live tweets on, because it's engaging and we've seen it work with other organizations. It's successful. But things that we've had to turn off for are things like trolls. Like we get a lot of those, specifically like white older men who are just attacking everything we say, especially when like a tweet goes viral or we're doing something that's peculiar. We've had to like turn off like tweeting for a while, or just like, you know, like get off social media, because it really does hit us hard. Like people have had hits on their mental health and just like have suffered a little bit of like actually like listening to like what these people are saying online, even though they're like lies and things like that. So in that case, like it's been hurtful and we've had to turn off like our engagement on social media, but there are trends that have worked and are still working that we are partaking in for the betterment of the movement.
Awesome. Olivia?
I mean, this isn't really a trend, but we found that when we began to post all of our, we are a public-facing organization, so all of our meetings are open to the public, or most of them. We put the location on Facebook, and that works to turn people out, but it also works to draw trolls. And they're not just trolls because they have shown up, they have disrupted our meetings, they've vandalized our office space. We eventually, this was last year at the height of this, we had to stop publicizing our meetings for a while because they kept harassing us to the point where we were having an event at Portland Community College, and just them posting about it online was enough to prompt PCC to cancel our event because right-wingers threatened to come to it. So that's been a real problem for us, and we've had to really develop like a robust professional safety team of volunteers. This just happened last night. You probably know who Andy No is. He's a grifter who pretends he's a journalist. And he tweeted that we were going to be at the Moda Center where the Blazers play last night. Because we were protesting that they were playing an Israeli team, and we were asking people to honor the boycott and not attend. And Andy No tweeted that we were going to be there, so it got Gregory Isaacson, who is a known Nazi Holocaust denier, to show up, and he was like physically threatening me and trying to get in my space. But our safety team was there to like block him because we know at this point that these people are going to show up. If we put it online, they're going to be there, and that's a real concern we've had to deal with. It's what we put online translates to concerns for our safety offline. So I still think the rewards of having our meetings be public vastly outweigh the risk, but it's just something we have to take really seriously.
And can you speak on that, if you're comfortable, a little bit more about what that has meant? Definitely hear you in creating responses to keep organizers safe. What kind of response has that created for people who maybe would have been attending those meetings that now feel like, well, maybe I'm not safe either, just as an attendee? Can you speak to how you've had to respond to the community's concerns?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and there are people who don't show up because they don't feel safe. It's died down a little bit, but we're also walking this weird line where, of course, we don't want to call the cops either because the cops are on their side. So we really have to rely heavily on our volunteers to do the work of de-escalation, and keeping us safe. And they do a really good job of that. I don't know what we would be shut down if we didn't have them because we wouldn't be able to gather in public, which is a real concern. And you see it also, another thing that Pop Mob has done really well. At these anti-fascist demonstrations, you have the people in Black Bloc who are, risking their lives. They are on the front lines right up against these fascists, and that makes people scared to attend, obviously, because they don't want to some people don't want to put themselves in danger. And Pop Mob has done a really good job of being like, well, here's this other fun thing you can do in the back. We'll have Black Bloc be up there. Thank God for them, and we'll be back here, still out there showing our support, but in like a green zone, a safer area. That's something that y'all have done really well.
Well, thank you. I think an important part of that conceit is the safe zone isn't like 10 blocks away, right? That like we're inviting people to come out and participate, and we're trying to give people a gradient in which they can engage that goes from like red to green. But you have to come from this. You have to come from the place of knowing that like there's never going to be zero risk, and we all take risks every day, right? We take risks driving our cars, right? Like driving your car is the most dangerous thing that you can possibly do. It's much more dangerous than even going in Black Bloc and being in the front line, pushing back against the alt-right. Probably driving your car is 10 times more dangerous than that. Right, because
at least in Portland, did you see the report?
Oh, yeah.
Worst drivers in the country.
Yeah, at least we're number one in something.
Yeah.
So you're never, there's always some amount of risk, but I think if you're part of an org and you're an org that does event planning that's specifically around political work that has risk like that, I think that it's a really good tool to acknowledge, like, we're not just trying to create an event for 17 to 24-year-old people who are prepared to street fight, right? Like that's not what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to inspire all everyday anti-fascists to feel safer in their city. Because like sitting at home in my house looking at Gab, which is full of Nazis, I feel terrified. I think the world is ending. I think we've already lost. But when I stand in the streets and I'm surrounded by 6,000 people from the city who are out in the streets with me, I feel safer. I feel better about living here. I feel better about being a person. I feel more excited to do all the things, all the political work I'm going to do that I'm not getting paid for. I'm exhausted, but I know that people show up. And they show up because you create a container that they're excited to engage with. And sometimes that just looks like a dance party. Sometimes that looks like a dance party with signs that's right next to the protest, that's technically part of the protest, right? Make it fun.
Actually, that's an important point because you said, okay, the alt-right are losers, and it's totally true. They look like losers, and every demonstration, I think in the US and in Europe, shows that they are losers and they have the worst demonstrations, only men, everything, everybody has the same shitty t-shirt. So of course, the progressive is better in demonstrating, so maybe they should get better online also. But may I ask a question?
Yes.
To them? Okay. Hey.
You're the journalist on the stage.
So actually, I'm curious about how do you feel like more threatened in the last like 2 or 3 years? Because you were saying, okay, yeah, we're having these trolls in our discussions, and you were talking about the alt-right and being protected by the black bloc. So you're protected by the black bloc. What is a good thing? So do you feel more threatened in the last years?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've only been doing this for 3 years, but as we grow and as we build power, it is very clear that they feel threatened, and so they threaten us. And you know, they're the ones in power. So I think as we continue to grow, we're going to face a lot more danger, and it's going to look like our social media getting shut down. It's going to look like people getting arrested, people getting interrogated, people being. I'm sure I'm already on a million lists, but I think the danger is only going to grow, and we're going to have to talk about eventually what we do when these online tools are no longer available to us, because I think that day is coming if things don't turn around.
What do you do? What are your plans?
I think we need to talk about mutual aid and community self-defense. I think it's a real possibility that things are going to go south really fast.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, because like when there's one troll attacking you, then you see like a bunch more, and like you don't see that in defense. So like that's something that we face within our organization, where like people started attacking us, so like a lot of their like, you know, online friends started attacking us as well. But where was that like community support like of defense or something like that, other than like the texts of support, like, oh, we're with you, blah blah blah. But like definitely more online like verbal support that's seen online will definitely make our community look stronger in front of them, because they definitely have this strong online presence when it comes to trolling and when it comes to attacking and like threatening people online.
Kat, you wanna?
Yeah, so I've like I said, I've been going to protests since I was quite young, and you know, historically the primary potential antagonist. Now sometimes you go to a protest and you just march around and you hold some signs and you say some chants, and everybody goes home. That's fine. But the primary possible antagonist in most of the situations prior to the last couple of years has just been the police. And I consider the police to be essentially wild bears, that you should always treat them as though they are potentially about to flip out and attempt to murder you. But they generally operate by rules, right? That they, and then this is obviously, your mileage may vary, but in general, at a protest, you can watch and follow as their tactics change. That they, before they're going to attack a crowd, they're going to tell you, hi, we're about to attack you, and they're going to do that about 20 times before they do that. Versus this most recent, the threat of the alt-rights, when they're mobilized in large groups, like they're literally just a mob, they have no rules, they have no laws, there's nothing binding their the way that they're acting. And so that is a much, much more intimidating circumstance. And also they come to Portland specifically looking for a fight. So that's, you know, it continues to be super scary.
We are almost out of time.
All right.
So I don't think that we can end a conversation about activism without all of you getting stage time, a couple minutes to call folks to action, to whatever actions you want them to be taking, whether that's showing up in certain spaces, whether that's personally learning how to stand up when an organization they support is under attack, whatever it may be. This is like, literally you have a microphone. Literally you're on a stage. Call the world to action however you see fit. You want to go first?
It's a very German expression. I think it's a double strategy. I don't know if it makes sense in English. It does, maybe. Double strategy means like going on the street, go in the black bloc if you feel like this, and also do a YouTube channel. Yeah. That's it.
Okay, so I wish that I wish that the way that Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boys and all of the alt-right like wingnuts in the Pacific Northwest, I wish that they operated with like a calendar where they were like, 4 months from now, we're going to have our protest in downtown Portland. We get like 3 weeks to maybe 5 weeks in advance notice to just sort of like organize like totally insane people on Signal and on Facebook and in person in meetings. So I can't give you a calendar of like the next pop mob action to come out for. What I can ask you to do is, obviously, if you're a Portland native and you're a Portland local and you're interested in participating in anti-fascist action in Portland, you can follow us on all the various social media places at PopMobPDX. That's at POPMOBPDX. So you can keep track of us there. As for a more sort of general call to action, if you're not already engaged in some kind of work, some kind of political activism, do something. We need you. We need everyone. We need all of you, regardless of what you're called to do. Right now, I am called to do anti-fascist organizing, but fighting to save the planet, fighting to create some sort of system of government that's not a complete nightmare for everyone. There are so many important causes to get involved in. Get involved in something. Join an org that you respect, and if you can't find one, start it. Everything is not as hard as it seems. You don't have to be a professional. You just have to get out there, screw up, and just do the thing. And try to have as much fun as you possibly can while you're doing it, because you only get to live once.
We have a saying, socialism or barbarism. I think it's clear that those are our choices. We are hurtling towards catastrophe. A society that is built on the exploitation of others, that is built on greed to make profit for a few while exploiting the many, is not going to survive. So we need all of you to join us. We need a mass movement to win. Voting is not going to cut it. You need to be organized. You need to join an organization. Please get organized. Join DSA, join another organization doing this kind of work. A better world is possible, and we need all of you to build it.
Yeah, definitely on the same line. One, of course, act on climate change now. Visit thisiszerohour.org and learn about our platform. It's very intersectional. It's not just a climate crisis, it's a climate justice issue where there are different social justice issues intertwined with the climate crisis. And two, I agree with everything you guys said. Start local, because that's where you can make the most impact, and be an ally. Join an organization where you aren't necessarily affected by the issues that they're advocating for, but being an ally is just so strong and just sets a statement and helps empower that organization itself to become stronger and more successful in embarking on change.
The Max train is hollering out for you. Thank you. I know there's not a giant ballroom full of people here, but these 4 people are doing so much work that is going to benefit all of us. I'd love it if everybody here can just clap wildly and fill the space up for praise for them. Yay!